chapter 4. I hope this study has been a real blessing for you. It's been a blessing for me. I have to tell you that God wonderfully has taught me. I've been saved 40 some odd years, and I'm still learning the Word of God, aren't you? I just have discovered some wonderful things in this passage of Scripture. So you ready? Okay, you poke one another, keep one another awake here. We're looking at Ruth chapter 4, and just a handful of verses. Actually, verses 9 through 15 is where we'll be. So we had this weird picture. Hold on a second. All right, if you've not been with us, this is not going to make any sense to you. You're going to think I'm a lunatic. We had this weird picture, okay? This is what in case you're wondering. They weren't wearing loafers, but they were wearing sandals. Had that odd picture in the last passage of a man that we called Mr. So-and-so. In fact, the Hebrew reads, Mr. So-and-so, some certain man who's not named, who's handing this sandal to Boaz. And what was that all about? Did you understand that? What was that all about? Well, the land that the Old Testament saint, we'll bring our shoe up one more time. What do you do with a shoe? You put on your foot and you walk on, this is really difficult, I know, but bear with me. And you walk on the ground with it, right? And that's what the Old Testament saint would have thought of a sandal, except for in this passage that just came before this one, the sandal was a picture of the ground that the person had the right to who owned the sandal, because he would walk on his own ground. Did you get that part? That's not hard, right? He would either stand or walk on his own ground. That ground belonged to him. He'd walk on it. So the sandal was a picture of that person's right to that. So when Mr. So-and-so, Mr. Uncertain Name, and we suggested in a book that was so concerned about getting names right, it strikes us that this name is not being mentioned, just something to chew on. So he's offered this opportunity with a sandal of the land of Naomi, that Naomi is going to sell. But he's discovered that this is a package deal, right? And the package included what? Who? Ruth. So the sandal is summarily handed from Mr. So-and-so back to who? All right, Boaz. You already got that? Because I'm not interested in doing this anymore. This really sounded good when it was just simply land. It doesn't sound so hot when it's land and a Moabitess. Okay, so that's the beginning of where we are. This is the land that he had walked on. Read Genesis 13 and Joshua 1:3 about walking on land that you actually own. That was an Old Testament image. So the sandal represented the land that he, Mr. So-and-so, and now Boaz rightfully were entitled to own. All right, now it would have been a reproach. I told you to stick with me. So if you got to lean forward like the Bereans did, go ahead and do that. It would have been a reproach to Elimelech. You remember these names? Now he's no longer, he's in glory. And to Mahlon, to their names, if the family line had been cut off. This was a no-no in the Old Testament faith. You don't let family lines, I mean, we urge you to reach out to your spiritual family, right? Boy, in the Jewish culture, you just did not let that happen. You do not let people just die. You do whatever you can do to sustain them. So Isaiah 14:20 suggests to us that if you were to let, without doing anything about it, let your relative's family be cut off and have no future, that was unthinkable. So we all know that. So this action that's taking place here means a lot, doesn't it? The fact, I want you to think about this too, we won't turn there, but this family, Elimelech and Naomi and Mahlon, are all from the tribe of Judah. Did you all kind of put that together? If you didn't, you need to, because this is significant. They're all from the tribe of Judah. Now you say, well, why is that important, Pastor? Don't turn there, because some of you are going to want to do that over lunch. Turn here. Genesis 49:10 is the key to this. It would be through the tribe of Judah that one day a scepter would come, representing Messiah would come. That made people's family lines in the tribe of Judah all that more important. You cannot let them die out because Messiah might be coming through one of your families. And lo and behold, what do we have? It's exactly the situation here, isn't it? Messiah is going to come through. So all these providential workings are so important. And as we said before, as believers, letting God use you is important. Submitting to God and his providential plan, even today, is important for us to be used of God. So that takes us to verse 9. You thought we were already into the message. How about that? Then Boaz said to the elders and all the people, "You are witnesses today that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and Mahlon. Moreover, I have acquired Ruth the Moabitess, the widow of Mahlon, to be my wife in order to raise up the name of the deceased on his inheritance, so that the name of the deceased will not be cut off from his brothers." I wonder if he's looking at Mr. So-and-so when he said that, right? "Or from the court of his birthplace. You are witnesses today." So what's going on in verse 9? Boaz has acquired the right to the land that was Naomi's. Okay, everybody with me? Okay, gotta stay with me. The details are important. The details of God's word are important to us. And to the wife. And now we learn something else. Also to all the possessions of Elimelech, Mahlon, and Chilion. It's like, happy days are here again. Look at all this. I didn't realize all this is going to happen. So he becomes the possessor of these things. Now, the people who are standing around, have you ever been to an estate sale? How have you ever gone to an estate sale? Okay. How about an estate auction? Okay, all right, good. I want those who've been to an estate auction to think with me just for a moment. There are people who go to estate auctions who want to buy and are shrewd. They already know what they're looking for, and you can tell. Just watch the way they bid. They know the items. There are other people like, I don't know, me, who if I ever went to one of those, I'd be sitting back there just kind of, this is interesting. Just watch them do this stuff, just kind of watching. That is not what these people are doing in the gate. And you might be mistaken if you think that's what's happening. These are not bystanders. These are probably scores of people, citizens of the town of Bethlehem. And they're not just curious. They're in the gate, which is a formal place where judgment would take place, and other things as well. And they are actually witnesses. They're like the jury in a way. Now, there's no indication that they wrote all this stuff down, but who needed to? Everybody in the gate was watching, right? So they're watching, and they're witnesses to all of this. And this was actually a joyful time. I want you to think about this. You know, Elimelech and Mahlon's family line have a future now with Boaz. So in verse 10, look with me at verse 10. "Moreover, I have acquired Ruth the Moabitess." Again, nationality is mentioned. I don't think this is a mistake. And yes, I was willing to take someone who had genuine faith, just vibrant faith, but didn't fit in with the rest of us, Moabitess. "The widow of Mahlon, to be my wife in order to raise up," notice the two things, these wonderful things that Boaz thought through carefully before he even put himself in this position. "I am willing to take this foreigner to be my wife in order to raise up the name of the deceased on his inheritance. I am not going to live forever. When I pass away, and when the child that we have, and they do, becomes of age, this is no longer my property. It immediately goes to my son, who is not in my family. This is legally Mahlon's son. And I'm also going to do this. I'm going to keep the deceased man's name alive in the court of his birthplace." That's a long conversation. Let's boil it down to this. There they are in court. And the court was in the gate. The gate was where the whole public met. This is the social gathering place. I'm going to keep the name of Elimelech and Mahlon alive in the town of Bethlehem. Isn't that precious? I'm going to be the one who does that. And I'm willing to pay the cost of doing that. Now, I want you to think with me just for a moment. We haven't said much about this, but right about now you ought to be thinking about what God is like. If a human being would be willing to do all of this, I mean, wouldn't you? This is just evidence of incredible grace. Wouldn't you agree? He didn't have to do any of this. He could really pushed Mr. So-and-so to the limit and gotten in a lot of trouble. But he was willing to sacrifice. And I want us to think about this morning, about what our God is like. If a mere human being like Boaz could love an outcast, because that's what Ruth is in Bethlehem. She's an outcast. She's a Moabitess. If a mere human being operated on by the grace of God could redeem this outcast, not just care for them, but redeem the outcast, and that's what he does. If that same mere human being not only redeems them, but establishes a close, intimate relationship with them, what must God be like? Amen? I mean, it is right to think about this. This is a fallen little human being like us. And he tell you, I depend upon God. What must God, who is unfathomable in his love for us, and his redemption of us, be like if a human being could be like this? Verse 11. All the people who were in the court, that's in the gate, and the elders said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah." I want you to really focus on that. Rachel and Leah, both of whom built the house of Israel, and may you achieve wealth in Ephrathah and become famous in Bethlehem. All the people now pray. This is actually a prayer. I don't know if you noticed that. It's a prayer of blessing. So this whole crowd of witnesses, I don't know how they did this. Somebody perhaps led them in prayer. May God bless you, first of all, Ruth. They first look at Ruth. And by that we mean, may you make Ruth like Rachel and Leah. Now look up just for a second. Who were the founders of Israel? Because they were. Well, along with their handmaids, I realized that was part of this too. But it was Rachel and Leah and their handmaids that gave birth to the 12 sons of Israel. God, may you do the same thing in some way with this outcast, Ruth, that you did with Rachel and Leah. Now, I want you to think about this. How do you think that Rachel and Leah were probably regarded as heroines, heroes, throughout the Old Testament history? You think that maybe they were? I almost want to start launching to Fiddler on the Roof. May you be like Ruth and like Esther. If you don't know that song, don't worry about it. I'm not singing anymore for you. Rachel and Leah were highly regarded, especially Rachel. I mean, people took the cue from Jacob for generations afterwards. Rachel and Leah. Have you ever thought about this? Rachel and Leah and Ruth had something else in common. They were citizens of a foreign nation. Like Ruth was a citizen of a foreign nation, not part of the Promised Land, not part of Israel. That was also true of Rachel and Leah. They were foreigners. They are from a land called Aram, Haran, which today is a wonderful country of Syria, which still is not real friendly, which brings up another point. Not only was Ruth a foreigner, but she was a citizen of an enemy nation. Think about that. The wonderful grace of Jesus, right? Greater than all our sin. How shall my tongue describe it? Where shall his grace be? She was a foreigner. She was a citizen of an enemy nation, but understand that Rachel and Leah were also citizens of a hostile nation to Israel. Because Syria wasn't back then, and Syria isn't now embracing the promised land. In fact, missiles fly, right? What an amazing work of God. So there are these wonderful similarities. You come back on Wednesday night. I have a list of, and I don't have time to talk about these tonight, but I'm going to show you some other parallels in this passage, but I'll have to wait until, Lord willing, Wednesday night. So may you be like them. But isn't it interesting it didn't read Rachel and Leah? Because how would Jacob have read this? If you're going to be anything like anything, you be like my wives. Oh, Rachel and Leah. It was always Rachel and Leah, right? Rachel was his sweetheart. And Leah was, well, a legal necessity, right? My heart always has gone out to Leah. God knows, and God has made up the difference in glory today for her. But he didn't mention, he mentioned Leah and Rachel. It's fascinating. Why would that be? Why did he mention them in that order? Leah was his natural first wife. I mean, I know, by a few hours maybe, but she was his first wife. And Rachel came afterwards. Rachel was his childhood sweetheart. You want to say it's childhood. Rachel was also emphasized because the Bethlehemites, right outside the city limits, I've been here. It's really cool. Remember our bus, this wasn't this trip, it was a trip before that, and we were led on a trip to the Holy Land by a Messianic Jew. And he drove a bus, and we got up into the area of Bethlehem, which is, that's pretty sketchy. There are problems in that area, so they don't want you getting off the bus very often. But he thought, you need to get off now. This is important. Because we're right now in the vicinity outside of Bethlehem, at an area called Bethlehem Ephrathah. And this is where Rachel was buried. So perhaps that's the reason why you see Rachel getting the first billing. Of the two, who would the Bethlehemites wanted to support the most? It probably would have been their heroine, their hero, possibly Rachel. The great crowd of witnesses, crowd of witnesses, now turn their attention from Rachel, and they want to pray for Boaz, a prayer of blessing. You see that in verse 11? May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home, okay, Boaz, like Rachel and Leah, both of whom built the house and may you, Boaz, achieve wealth in Ephrathah and become famous in Bethlehem. So now he's focusing upon Boaz, and he prays God's blessing, and that God would give him wealth, and that God would give him a name. Now, it's interesting. I just read in Ecclesiastes chapter 7. And young people to our oldest folks here, saints that know Christ, your name is important. So this prayer is pretty important. May God maintain your reputation so that it will bring honor to him. Young people, your reputation is important. Boaz's reputation is awfully important, and that's their prayer. To our older saints, your reputation, don't blow it along in the final lap, right? Because it's important. And may God further bless you by you fathering offspring like a man named Perez, in verses 11 and 12. Verse 12, moreover, may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah through the offspring which the Lord will give you by this young woman. Okay, right about now, you need to kind of poke yourself. Okay, you still there? God decided to get into the details here in verse 12. And he says, may God bless you as you father your son like Perez fathered his son. Who's Perez? I just gave you the passage. It's in Genesis 38. Look it up. Out of all the people, have you ever heard this name before? Heard it? Okay. The Spirit of God thought this was important. Perez was the most significant son of one of the sons of Israel, and that son is Judah. Any surprise there? You can see where all this is going. This whole final chapter of the book of Ruth is going toward someone coming through the line of Judah. And that someone eventually is going to be King David, and we understand that later the Son of God will come through the line of Judah, through the line of David. So Perez is the most significant son of the book of the tribe of Judah himself. David eventually would come from this man himself. All right, look at verse 12. God gets the ultimate credit here in this passage, and he says this in the back, which the Lord will give you by this young woman. Now, look up just for a moment. For years, Ruth had lived where before she came to Israel? Where did she live? In Moab, right? The chief god of Moab was Chemosh. And Chemosh was a god that would grant a false god who would supposedly grant fertility or the ability to bear children. In all the years that she and her husband lived in Moab, what good did Chemosh do them? And what you're simply getting in this passage is God is going to get the credit for what Chemosh could never do. May God be praised, the one who is going to grant you this son. All those years, in Moab, and God is the real giver of life, Genesis 29:31. Now, I titled this message, More Than a Grandma. And thinking people, I'm not sure if are you out there? Might be wondering, I've not heard anything at all about grandmas and what it means to be more than a grandma. But I realized, as I was preparing for the Lord's Day this morning, how significant Naomi is as we wind this book down. We have a lot of grandmas in this church. And I just want to prepare you for how important being a grandma that allows herself to be used by God really is. And we will just barely scratch the surface this morning, which means you'll hear, God willing, more about this next Lord's Day. So in the final verses, it's almost like, you ever see years ago, old reruns, and you see somebody in the camera, and they pan back, they pull the camera back, NBC or CBS, those big honking cameras. You know what I'm talking about? Okay, back in the 60s, black and white. And they pan back and they refocus. That's what's happening. So all of a sudden, you get this book. What's the name of this book? Ruth. And the handful of verses that remain, we suddenly lose. She fades a bit in the background. I don't want to say they live happily ever after. That's for glory, right? But they head into their lives. God's going to bless them. And the lens gets foggy and fuzzy. And then it refocuses on somebody. You go, why is this happening? This is a book about Ruth. Right. Sort of. The final verses focus now upon Naomi. And I want you to think about this. We started this book, and who was the focus? Naomi. And guess what God is going to do? He's going to come full circle, do what he promised to do, and he has some unfinished business. Does God ever have unfinished business? There is a plan that he has. He's going to come back to Naomi, who is going to be a grandma, but more than a grandma. So the book of Ruth starts with Naomi. It ends with Naomi in verses 14-15. Look with me at verses 14-15. Then the women said to Naomi, "Blessed is the Lord, who has not left you without a redeemer today, and may his name become famous in Israel. May he also be to you a restorer of life." Again, this is a prayer. "And a sustainer of your old age, for your daughter-in-law who loves you and is better to you than 7 sons. And all the daughters in here said amen, right? Your daughter, better than 7 sons, has given birth to him. All right, what's going on here? When we started this book, we were on the outskirts of the town of Bethlehem, and we were standing in a crowd of ladies. Remember that? And they're all looking out there and saying, who is that? Who's coming? That can't be. That's not Naomi, right? And she's got somebody with her. But that doesn't look like Naomi. I mean, when she left, she was doing pretty well, you know. Elimelech was probably a known person in the community. This can't be her. So you had a crowd of women and that's what they saw. And then when she came into their company, she said a few things. And it's my personal opinion that God wants to have his say about that. We were trying to be very gracious toward Naomi, because who, going through circumstances like this, wouldn't have been embittered and struggled and dependent upon the grace of God? She said, listen, my name is not pleasant. Stop calling me Naomi. God has not made me pleasant. The Lord has made me bitter. And it just happens to be my opinion that God wanted to come back to that and straighten that out. Well, I don't think the Lord really wanted that to just kind of hang out there in the air. God is responsible for all this horrible things taking place. And where is he now? So God is going to address this. And now you have a group of ladies. Isn't that interesting? Like you saw in the first chapter. And what are they doing? They're gathering around and they're saying, that Lord that Naomi in chapter 1 said was responsible for bitterness and difficulty. What are they saying now? Blessed be the Lord. Oh, that's the way he really is. Boy, did we get that wrong. Well, she certainly got that wrong, even though she struggled with it. How different from the words of chapter 1, where Naomi said, he's left me. He's made me bitter. In fact, what do they say? He has not left you. By the way, somebody needs to hear that today. Right? Difficulty does not mean that God has left you. Often it is a sign that he is busily at work. He has not left you without a redeemer today. Whoa, who would have seen that one coming? I've just finished the book of Job. And God does have a habit, I suppose, of when things are said that are not right about him, of having the last say. And so the last 2 or 3 chapters of Job is God straightening things out. You said this, and where were you? Which means you're not God and I am. So let me tell you the way this really is. And he shows grace as a result. I think you're finding that personally in this passage. Now look up just for a second. This is what really sunk in. I do not want you to miss this. Wouldn't it be great if we, when we saw difficulty coming and suspected this could be a real rolling wave of hardship through our lives, if at that point we would say with Job, blessed is the Lord. I didn't have anything, Lord. I wasn't born with anything. And when I leave, I'm going to have you. I won't need the stuff anyway. I'll have nothing. But blessed be the name of the Lord. As you see the difficulty coming on the front end. By that I mean in chapter 1, say that, right? Wouldn't it have been better? Wouldn't it be good? Is that a lesson maybe we could really embrace today? How do you think hardship will ever come to you? All right? How about this? Lord, I have said some things that I'm grateful for Naomi, a saint who struggled. I've said things like that. I've blamed you for things. Oh, Lord, please forgive me. I didn't get this at all. I didn't see that you're in all of this. And now, when it's getting resolved, that's kind of where we usually are, right? Yay! And I'll be there on Wednesday night just giving God the praise, because look what he's done. He's paid off my debt. We love talking about that, right? I get it. He's healed my husband. He has taken care of my relative. He saved this person. I thank the Lord for that. Where is that on the front end? Did God change? He has always been like that. He was worthy of that back in chapter 1, wasn't he? This is a lesson I'm trying to take to heart, And I think Job, he wrestled with a lot of things, but he got some things right too, didn't he? God has given, he's taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And I mean, Lord, I love you. We've been through so much. And you've always seen me through. We have grown closer and closer. And even in the middle of this, I will attest, I will bear witness, God, great is thy faithfulness, O God, my Father. Even now, there's no shadow of turning with you. You don't change, thou changest not. Thy compassions, God doesn't love me anymore. Nope. Thy compassions, they fail not. As thou hast been in chapter 1, you are still in chapter 4, and forever will be. Great is thy faithfulness. Wouldn't that be a blessing if we would learn that today? Say, God, this is the day I learned this. No, this is the day I start learning this, right? It's a process, right? And if you flubbed, we know what that's like. You start. Okay, you make it right and you start anew. Now, don't let me lose you. I'm almost finished, because this gets, my word is neat. In verse 12, let me say, no, verse 15, verse 15. May he also be to you a restorer of life. Look up. So, if we are in that crowd with these women who are now blessing God for his faithfulness all along, and we heard that, may he be a restorer of life. Lord, I'm so grateful that you brought Boaz. What a blessing. Because I guess he's able to restore things back to the life of Naomi, and of Mahlon and Chilion, and of Ruth. I think that's very much possible. So there's a check on that one. Got that? He's famous. Well, that sounds like Boaz, right? Didn't we just pray that? May God make Boaz famous.